Hi everyone. I want to talk today about something that should just stop everybody in their tracks because the numbers I'm going to tell you are so big they almost don't sound real. The true cost of Ed Miliband's net zero plan has finally been revealed. Brace yourself, guys. £4.5 trillion. Yep, that's £4.5 trillion over the next 25 years. To put that into context, that is more than the entire UK economy produces in a year. Our entire GDP gone and then some. This isn't a guess. These figures come from official government estimates, quietly published last month by the National Energy System Operator, NESO, a government quango responsible for overseeing Britain's energy system. And what they show is actually staggering. Labour's drive towards net zero, which critics have long warned is obsessive and ideological, could cost ordinary Britons trillions of pounds through a combination of green energy projects, forced technology change and massive infrastructure upgrade. Now let's break down where this money is actually going, because this is where it gets very real. Firstly, inside your home. According to these figures, households will be forced to spend £585 billion moving away from gas boilers and towards so-called eco-friendly heat pumps. That's not optional, guys. That's not a lifestyle choice. That's hundreds of billions of pounds pushed onto ordinary families, many of whom are already struggling with energy bills. Next, wind farms and pylons. New wind farms plus the electricity pylons that are needed to connect them are expected to cost just a mere £1 trillion. That's £1 trillion to cover the countryside with turbines and cables. Then we come to electric vehicles. Switching the entire country over to electric vehicles and building the charging infrastructure to support them could cost up to £2.6 trillion. £2.6 trillion. And add it all together, and the UK would need to spend 182 billion every single year to hit net zero targets by 2050, every single year for a quarter of a century. Now, critics say that this level of spending risks bankrupting the country, and it's hard to see really how it won't. Richard Tice, for example, from Reform, has called it exactly what many people have been warning about for years: net zero madness. He said this confirms that the policy will only succeed in bankrupting Britain, and that a Reform government would scrap it immediately, cut energy bills and focus on growth instead. I wish the current government would do that. But he's not alone. Even senior Conservatives are now openly calling this out for what it is. Claire Coutinho, the Shadow Energy and Net Zero Secretary, said the figures expose the lies at the heart of the Net Zero campaign. Lies, guys. For years, we've been told that net zero would mean cheaper energy. This data shows exactly the opposite, and we all know it, don't we? Families and businesses will be forced to spend hundreds of billions upgrading boilers, buying expensive electric cars, paying for infrastructure, all while China opens a new coal power station every couple of weeks. Britain will spend trillions to feel virtuous, while global emissions barely budge. And here's where the hypocrisy comes, and it is impossible to ignore. Even government ministers don't trust the technology that they are forcing on you and me. Recently in the Mail on Sunday, it was revealed that ministers are already suffering from range anxiety in their official electric cars. There are 42 fully electric Jaguars in the government fleet, and insiders say that they struggle to get ministers much beyond the Midlands. You've got to laugh. In cold weather, battery range can drop by up to 40%. In other words, the very people mandating electric vehicles for the public can't rely on them to do their own jobs. It's laughable. Yet the government is still committed to moving to a fully zero emission ministerial fleet by next year. It's madness, isn't it? Even though it may severely limit their ability to travel around the country and do their job. Meanwhile, pressure is mounting on Ed Miliband to double down even further. Oh, please don't encourage him. He's expected to announce plans to spend £13 billion over the next 4 years on grants for solar panels, batteries and heat pumps, all in this mad scramble to meet Labour's promise to cut energy bills. That promise is long gone. And don't forget, these solar panels, guys, often use prime farmland, so we lose food security even more step by step because it's easy money for farmers who are already under the cosh, so who can blame them? As for the panels themselves, the ecosystem under and around them is destroyed. They come from China, they have a 20-year lifespan, and they pollute when disposed of. And recently it was discovered that China is sending us solar panels with kill switches in. Any energy they do actually produce could just be turned off when China decides to turn us off. And let's not get onto the grid that just can't take the combined solar and wind electricity generated. And so we pay millionaires running these companies to not produce electricity. But here's the real humdinger. Government figures released earlier this month showed the UK actually increased electricity production from fossil fuels last year, despite the push for net zero. In other words, renewables alone are not delivering what was promised, which is why more voices are now calling for reliable power sources like nuclear and natural gas to be prioritised instead of these blind ideological targets. Couple this with the new report from lead author Catherine Porter at energy consultancy WattLogic, who has warned that rationing will be required unless urgent steps are taken to address the rapid ageing of the gas-fired power station fleet. More than a dozen of Britain's gas power stations are simply running out of road. Most were built back in the 1990s and only lightly patched up in the 2000s. The really important parts, like the rotors for example, were never properly replaced. Those components wear out. When they fail, you're talking about years to manufacture and install new ones. Right now, there is no serious plan to replace or fully refurbish most of these plants. We're just crossing our fingers and hoping that they just keep on working. Gas-fired power stations currently generate around a third of all of the UK's electricity. But on days when the wind doesn't blow, which happens more often than ministers like to admit, that figure can shoot up to 2/3 or even more. Strip away the spin and gas is what keeps our lights on, guys. And according to Catherine Porter, who authored this report, this situation is heading for a cliff edge. Within the next 5 years, very likely before the next general election, sadly, a large chunk of these gas plants could be forced offline, either because they physically fail due to age or because it no longer makes economic sense to keep them running. And this problem is about to get much worse. At the same time as gas capacity is becoming more fragile, the UK is shutting down its nuclear power stations. 8 of the 10 remaining reactors are due to close before or by 2030. That's reliable, round-the-clock power being switched off, with nothing credible lined up to replace it. And what makes this even more alarming is that previous estimates from the Office of Budget Responsibility put the cost of net zero at around £800 billion. Now we're being told that the true cost could be more than 5 times higher, as if that number wasn't big enough. And it's unclear if any of those billions and trillions are to keep gas-fired power stations running. So in the face of this lunacy, the Quango behind the report insists this spending will eventually reduce the share of the economy spent on energy and protect us from price volatility. But that's a big promise, and one being made after asking the public, well, not even asking us, to shoulder trillions in upfront costs. So this is where we are. A £4.5 trillion plan, higher household costs, forced technology adoption, unreliable infrastructure making the situation worse as time passes, reliance on China and allowing them into our grid, a grid that can't cope with an increased energy production, and ministers who don't even trust the system themselves. At some point, we have to be able to ask the obvious question. Is this really about the environment, or is it just about ideology regardless of cost? Because Britain, you and me, simply cannot afford this. We are hurtling towards the situation where we will have blackouts. The UK in 2026 facing blackouts, and this, we're told, is progress. If you like this, guys, hit like, share it, subscribe, and thank you for listening as always. Take care.